I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're uncovering a shocking new perspective on one of the most beloved stories of all time. The name of the book, The Oz Code, an allegory on isolationism. It's written by a terrific writer, a terrific guest. Her name is Loretta Pyrdek, and she takes us beyond the fantasy to reveal hidden historical truths woven into The Wizard of Oz. This eye-opening book connects the characters and events of Oz to real-life figures and moments in the 20th century, exposing a twist that has remained a secret for decades. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her amazing book. The links are below the interview. And be sure to download the Spotlight Network TV app, streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Loretta, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. I'm honored. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
The honor is all mine. This is an amazing book. When did you first say to yourself, hey, The Wizard of Oz is about something more than what we're looking at here?
Well, let me give you the backstory of how it started. I was always a Wizard of Oz fan, had the books, many of the books growing up, saw the movie, just enjoyed it for many years. One day I was doing housework, very ordinary job, and an image popped into my mind of Dorothy and the Three Companions. And I hadn't seen the movie recently or read the books, and so I really don't know why. It was just my subconscious, I guess, acting up. And it occurred to me that maybe Dorothy represented the United States and the companions were representing the sectors going into World War II. And so that kind of got me started thinking along those lines. And then as I started looking into it further and doing more research, I came across the biography of Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and learned that he grew up in Kansas. He was born in Texas, but he actually grew up in Kansas, And I thought, OMG, I wonder if that could be Dorothy because of the Kansas connection. And that got me started thinking, well, maybe some of the other characters also had historic counterparts. And so that kind of got me off and running. And I thought the twist was maybe the characters, a lot of the female characters, could possibly represent historical males. And the more I looked into it, the more I saw parallels and counterparts that could make sense. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Amazing, amazing. So Dorothy is the United States. Eisenhower is is he the guy without a brain? Is he the scarecrow? Which one is
Well, Dorothy, originally I thought Dorothy was the United States, but then I came to think of Dorothy as Eisenhower.
Okay.
And the other characters, the scarecrow without a brain, I think that's the agricultural sector. The Tin Man without a heart, I think, is the industrial sector. And the Cowardly Lion, I think, was the military. So those were broad sectors as opposed to individual characters or historic figures.
Wonderful. Talk to us about isolationism and the role it plays in the Oz Code.
All right, a good question. Early on, L. Frank Baum, he lived in Chicago at the time when he wrote The Wizard of Oz. And he actually was in Chicago at the time that William Jennings Bryan was campaigning for president. So I don't know how much you may know about Bryan, but he ran for president for 3 times, for 3 elections. He was very famous orator. And Baum would have known of him as a contemporary. What Baum wouldn't have known was after running for president later on, Bryan actually became the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. And this was prior to World War One. And World War One, the uh, hostilities were brewing in Europe. It was, tumultuous times, kind of like what we're going through today. And there was a lot of fear and apprehension that war was going to break out in Europe. And Bryan was an isolationist. He did not believe, well, he was a pacifist. He did not believe in going to war. So he was kind of a conscientious objector. So he was advising Wilson not to get involved. Don't get involved in these European conflicts. Stay out. And for a while, Wilson was abiding by his advice. Then the Lusitania was sunk, and that really precipitated the United States getting into World War One. So Bryan then lost his influence in that sphere as an isolationist or as a pacifist. Then, as I call World War II, World Wars One and Two binary wars. World War One never was really resolved completely, and it led to World War II. And there was a big movement also back in the United States called the America First movement. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And that was another isolationist movement. Thousands of people joined. There were meetings and protests, and people were, because again, it was obvious that war was brewing in Europe again, and people wanted to stay out. Now, of course, they knew what the carnage had taken place in World War One. Nobody wanted to repeat losing the thousands of lives that had been lost. And it's an understandable sentiment that people don't want to go to war, and they don't want to lose, their people, their soldiers or service people. So that movement was burgeoning prior to World War One, and that's around the time that the movie came out, the MGM version. There were actually other movie versions earlier in the century, but that was, probably to that point, that was the most famous version. And so when the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor, that kind of threw us and catapulted us into World War II. And it kind of marked the end of the isolationist America First movement that was taking place at that time. So I felt that there were connections to themes or characters or productions of The Wizard of Oz that also tied into these various movements in the United States toward isolationism or pacifism. Now, does isolationism or pacifism, do they work? Well, I suppose it's debatable, but it seems that we really have not been able to roll up our oceans and climb into a nice snug Midwest and not be bothered. It seems like we get pulled out, yanked out of our homes or our countries, regardless of how we may try to stay uninvolved. And I think that's what the message is. You could try to adapt isolationism, but it may not be ultimately the protection that you would like it to be, and it may not be the best course, because if you are uninvolved, you don't get to influence events. The events develop themselves, and you may get pulled in regardless of your will about it. So that's how I see this connection to the story as connected to, as an allegory on isolationism. And the characters then are allegorical. The characters in the book are symbolic of, as I've said, historic figures or events.
Amazing, amazing. So do you feel that this was L. Frank Baum's intention when he wrote this book? Is there any
Well,
proof of that at all? Was he politically active or motivated?
he was political. He was a newspaper editor. He had
Mhm.
been involved in some historic events and knew about them. I don't think, though, that that was his intention with the story.
Mhm.
I think he set about to write a lovely children's fairy tale.
Mhm.
And he was really trying to entertain children. He was a really lovely person, a
Mhm.
family man, very multi-talented, very ambitious. And I think that he saw it as really more of just a pleasing fairy tale.
Right.
He himself felt, though, that he did not originate the story. I don't know if you got to read that part in the book
Mhm.
where he talks about how it came to him, like out of the blue, and he felt he was the instrument at hand to record the story.
Hmm.
So it's almost not. It's almost like he did not himself feel that he was the originator. He felt there was a message to convey, and he was the instrument at hand. So I'm not sure what his complete motivation was about it. I don't know if he had any inkling that it tied into something more serious and
Yeah.
later on.
Amazing. It's an amazing, unique perspective, and
Mm.
you make such a great case for this within your book. Before we leave you today, just got to get your
Sure.
opinion on Wicked. What do you think of
Uh,
that?
well, I was disappointed that the movie version didn't win more Oscars.
Okay.
um, I did see the performance of the singers. They're lovely, such uh, so talented, such wonderful voices. I saw the stage version of it a number of years ago. It's quite a different take on the
Mhm.
story. And kudos to the writer who conceived of it. He took these characters, gave them a backstory, gave them a whole different persona and connection. And I appreciate the creativity of
Mhm.
Wicked, but I don't see it as really having much of a connection to the original story. Now, there have been a lot of spin offs of different versions and different stories. And I say have at it. Anybody has the right to do that. But I don't see Wicked per se as being actually connected in the same way to my theory as The Wizard of Oz, the
Yeah.
original version, is.
And I feel other than taking the characters from The Wizard of Oz and putting them in another story, they're really not connected at all. But
Right.
it's still entertaining, which is
Sure.
the work of it. That's for sure.
Sure.
This book
And it's
is wonder.
beautifully done. And I think there's going to be a sequel, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite successful. You know, it was a blockbuster, and I
Yeah.
give it credit for that. Maybe the second uh, version will get more Oscars, so
Yeah,
that would
or
be
maybe
nice.
it'll fill in the gaps. I mean, because right now I have a hard time buying that the Wicked Witch of the West was only misunderstood when she went after Dorothy with such vengeance. But
Mm,
maybe
all
this
right.
new incarnation of Wicked, the sequel, will explain some things.
We'll
The name,
explain that.
yep, the
Yeah.
name of the book
And
we've
of
been. Go
course,
ahead.
if you think of the Wicked Witch of the West as being Hitler, as I do,
Mhm.
there's almost no redeeming quality there that would
Exactly.
soften him. So I would agree with you about that.
Yeah, certainly Hitler was not misunderstood. He was a tyrant, maybe misunderstood in the beginning. They thought he had better intentions than he had.
Mm,
That's for sure.
yes,
Nobody would try
yes,
to appease him, knowing what we
mm,
know today. The name of
for
the book
sure.
is The Oz Code, an allegory on isolationism. In the book, Loretta takes us beyond the fantasy to reveal hidden historical truths woven into The Wizard of Oz. It is an eye-opening book that connects the characters and events of Oz to real-life figures and moments in the 20th century, exposing a twist that has remained a secret for decades until now. Loretta,
Not a secret anymore.
it's not a secret anymore. It's out there. Buy the book, read about it. It's fascinating. You will love Loretta's take on it all. Loretta, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Thank you so much, Logan. I really appreciate it. And I hope there will be people who will agree with it and not think that it's totally outrageous.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
don't think it's totally outrageous at all. I think it's wonderful. To the
Thank
folks at
you.
home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on
Okay.
Spotlight.